The Duke they buried 15 years ago just walked back to his own doorstep, and the first thing he saw was his son calling another man father. Not a stranger, not an enemy, his own brother. Inside that house, his wife carries another child. His name has been replaced. His life has been stolen. But what hurts the most is that she truly believed he was dead. And now the only question left is, was this fate or betrayal? Watch closely, because the truth will destroy everything. What would you do if the past you buried suddenly came back breathing? If you love powerful stories filled with royal drama, betrayal, and unforgettable twists, make sure you subscribe now to Duke and Duchess, and don't forget to tell us what city you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's begin. Morning light settled gently over Valecrest Manor, brushing against tall windows and warming the stone walls that had stood for generations. The estate felt alive in a quiet, comforting way. Servants moved through the halls with familiar purpose, silver trays carried carefully, the faint scent of baked bread and honeyed tea drifting from the kitchens. Outside, the gardens stretched wide and full, roses in bloom, their soft colors swaying in the breeze as if nothing in the world could disturb their peace. Duke Roderick Valecrest stood near the edge of the courtyard, speaking with a group of estate workers. His tone was calm, steady, never raised, yet every man listened closely. He asked after their families, noticed small details others would ignore, and offered help without making it feel like charity. When one of the older workers struggled to lift a crate, Roderick stepped forward without hesitation, taking the weight himself with a quiet smile that earned him laughter and respect in equal measure. He was not a distant noble. He belonged to this place as much as the land itself. From the balcony above, Duchess Isolde watched him, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. The soft fabric of her dress moved lightly with the wind, outlining the gentle curve of her pregnancy. 7 months along, yet she carried herself with grace, though the strain showed in small ways, the way she shifted her weight, the careful way she moved her fingers as if grounding herself. "He still insists on doing half the work himself," came a voice behind her. She turned slightly, smiling as Evander stepped into view. He leaned casually against the railing, his posture relaxed, his expression easy. "He says it keeps him honest," Isolde replied. Evander chuckled. "Or stubborn." There was warmth in his tone, nothing forced, nothing sharp. He had always been like that, present without being overwhelming, attentive without drawing attention to himself. He followed Roderick with his eyes for a moment, then glanced back at Isolde. "You should be resting," he added gently. "I have rested enough," she said, though her hand did not leave her stomach. Below them, Roderick looked up, as if he had felt her gaze. Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the estate faded. He excused himself from the workers and made his way toward the stairs, his steps quickening as he approached. "You're supposed to be taking it easy," he said the moment he reached her, his voice soft but firm. "And you're supposed to let others carry crates," she replied, a hint of humor lifting her tone. He smiled, reaching for her hand, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. "I will when you do. That is not a fair bargain. It is the only one I have." Evander shook his head lightly, stepping aside. "I see I am no longer needed here." "You were never needed," Roderick said, though there was affection in it. "Yet I remain," Evander answered with a faint grin, before leaving them alone. Roderick's attention returned fully to Isolde. He lowered himself slightly, placing his hand on hers on her stomach. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet was not empty. It was full, steady, certain. "He will be strong," she said. "Or stubborn." He let out a quiet breath of laughter, then grew still. "I will not miss his birth." Isolde held his gaze, searching it, as if trying to hold on to something just beyond reach. "You cannot promise that. I can."
Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Lady Seraphine entered the balcony with measured precision, her posture straight, her expression composed. "There is news," she said without delay. Roderick stood. "What kind of news?" "The southern territories have escalated beyond negotiation. The crown has called for noble command." The air shifted instantly. Isolde's fingers tightened slightly in Roderick's grasp. "They are asking you to lead," Seraphine continued, her voice steady, leaving no room for emotion. "Your name carries weight. Refusing would not go unnoticed." Roderick did not answer immediately. His jaw set, his eyes distant for a brief second before returning to clarity. "When do I leave?" "Soon." Isolde turned away, taking a slow breath as though steadying herself against something unseen. That evening the estate felt different. The same walls, the same rooms, yet something had changed beneath the surface. Dinner was quieter. Even the servants moved with a kind of careful awareness. When the time came, there were no grand speeches, only truth. Isolde stood before him in the dim light of the chamber, her hand resting against his chest as if memorizing the rhythm of his heartbeat. "You said you would be here," she whispered. "Yes, I will," he answered, his voice low, certain. "Before he is born, before he takes his first breath, I will be here." She wanted to believe him. She needed to. Roderick placed his hand gently over her stomach, then lifted it to her face, holding it there for a moment longer than usual. "I will come back to you," he said. Outside, the horses were already prepared. At dawn, he rode out. Isolde stood at the entrance of the manor, one hand holding her stomach, the other wrapped tightly around herself as if to keep from breaking apart. She watched until he disappeared beyond the hills, and even when he was gone, she did not move.
The war camp stretched across the southern plains like a living machine, every movement measured, every sound purposeful. Rows of canvas tents stood firm against the dry wind, their edges snapping lightly as soldiers moved between them carrying supplies, sharpening blades, adjusting armor. The scent of iron, leather, and wood smoke filled the air, blending with the faint bitterness of overboiled stew simmering in blackened pots. Duke Roderick Vailcrest stood at the center of command, his presence steady, his attention fixed. A large wooden table had been set beneath a reinforced canopy, its surface covered with detailed maps held down by daggers and metal weights. Lines marked routes, symbols marked positions, and every path had been studied carefully. Beside him stood Sir Albin Thorne, a seasoned commander whose trust was not easily given, yet fully placed in Roderick. "Our advantage lies here," Thorne said, pointing to a narrow pass between two ridges. "If we move at first light, we control the high ground before they can reposition." Roderick leaned slightly forward, his eyes scanning every detail. "And their supply line?" "Exposed," another officer replied. "If we break their center, they will not recover." There was confidence in the air, not arrogance, but the kind built from preparation and discipline. These were not careless men. They had studied, calculated, and committed. Roderick straightened, his voice calm but firm. "We move in formation, no deviation. The first line holds steady, the second supports without advancing too far. No one breaks position unless ordered." Every man around the table nodded. They trusted him, not because of his title, but because he gave them reason to. As the meeting ended, soldiers gathered for their evening meal. Bowls of thick stew were passed around, coarse bread torn by hand, quiet conversations shared under dim lantern light. Some spoke of home, others of what lay ahead, but beneath it all was a shared understanding of risk. Roderick sat briefly among them, eating little, listening more. He did not distance himself from his men. He never had. Far from the camp, miles away within the safety of Vailcrest Manor, a different kind of silence lingered. Evander sat alone in a dimly lit study, the flicker of a single candle casting shadows along the walls. A letter lay open before him, its contents already written, its purpose already decided. He dipped the quill carefully, his movements slow, deliberate. His expression did not change. Not when he wrote, not when he sealed it.
He pressed the wax firmly, his signet leaving a clear mark. For a moment, he held the letter between his fingers as though weighing it, not its paper, but its consequence. Then he set it aside. Outside, the night remained still. Back in the war camp, dawn arrived without ceremony. The army moved as planned. Lines formed with precision, shields aligned, commands passed clearly from one rank to the next. The ground beneath their boots was dry and uneven, but their pace remained steady. Roderick rode at the front, his posture firm, his focus unbroken. Everything was exactly as it should be. Until it wasn't. The first sign came as a sound, distant, unfamiliar, wrong. Then the arrows fell. Not scattered, not uncertain, directed, accurate. The front line staggered as men dropped almost instantly, confusion spreading faster than orders could contain it. Before anyone could regroup, enemy forces surged from positions they should not know to take. "They're too early," one soldier shouted. "They're exactly where we plan to be," another answered, panic rising in his voice. Roderick's eyes sharpened as he took in the unfolding chaos. The ridges were already occupied. The pass was blocked. Every movement they had prepared had been anticipated. "No," he muttered under his breath. "This is not chance." The second wave struck harder. Lines broke. Commands collided. Men who had trained together now struggled to find formation in the confusion. Steel clashed against steel, the air filling with the sharp sound of impact and the heavy weight of bodies hitting the ground. Roderick moved through it with controlled force, pulling men back into position, redirecting, stabilizing where he could. He did not retreat. He refused to let panic take control. "Hold the line," he called, his voice cutting through the noise. But the line was already failing. Sir Alban Thorne fought near him. Blood marked his sleeve, his stance unyielding. "They knew," he said, breath tight. "Every position, every movement." Roderick's grip tightened around his weapon. "We've been sold out." The words settled with a weight heavier than the battle itself. Still, he fought. Not for victory now, but for survival. He pushed forward, striking with precision, forcing space where there was none, trying to create an opening for the remaining men. Around him, familiar faces fell, men who had stood beside him only hours before. Time lost meaning. Only movement remained, until even that began to fade. A blow struck him from the side, sharp, disorienting. He staggered, his vision shifting as the ground beneath him felt less certain. Another strike followed, then another, until strength gave way to sheer endurance. Figures closed in around him, weapons drawn. Not to kill, to capture. He resisted, even then, his body refusing to surrender what his mind still held. But numbers overcame him where strength could not. His weapon fell from his hand. His knees followed. The world tilted. The sounds of battle grew distant, replaced by something quieter, heavier. As darkness crept in, his last sight was the field around him. Men scattered across the ground, still, unmoving. Their trust broken alongside their bodies. Not defeat, not failure, betrayal. And somewhere within that fading awareness, one thought remained. Not who had done it, but that someone had.
The letter arrived just before noon, carried by a royal courier whose presence alone was enough to quiet the household. The gates opened without delay, and within moments the sealed envelope passed from gloved hands to the steward, then into the long corridor where every footstep seemed louder than usual. Inside the drawing room, Duchess Isolde sat near the tall windows, a half-finished cup of tea resting untouched beside her. The light outside was gentle, but it did not reach her. One hand rested over her stomach, her breathing slow, as if she were holding herself together by force alone. Thomas entered carefully, his usual composure strained. He did not speak at first. He simply held out the letter. The seal said enough. Isolde looked at it for a long moment before taking it. Her fingers were steady, but something behind her eyes shifted. She broke the seal without haste, unfolded the paper, and read. There was no sound, no cry, no question.
The words settled into her without resistance, as though her body refused to reject them, even as her mind struggled to understand. When she finished, her hand lowered slightly, the paper still between her fingers. "He is gone," she said quietly. It did not feel like a statement. It felt like something spoken from far away. The room remained still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause between ticks. Then the pain came. It was sudden, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Her body folded inward as her breath caught, her hand gripping the arm of the chair.
Lean on me.
"Your Grace!" Thomas stepped
Pain is
forward,
so
but she was
strong.
already struggling to stand.
must get you to
Another
your room.
wave
Hold
followed,
on.
stronger, stealing what little balance she had left. She tried to speak, but the words broke apart before they formed. Within minutes, the calm of the manor shattered. Servants moved quickly, voices lowered but urgent, doors opening and closing with controlled haste. Towels were brought, water heated, instructions passed from one to another as the midwife was summoned without delay. Isolde was carried to her chamber, her grip tightening against anything she could hold on to. The pain came in waves, each one stronger than the last, leaving no space for thought, no room for understanding. Only fear, only confusion, and beneath it all something else, a loss too large to name. The hours that followed blurred together. Voices faded in and out. Hands guided her, steadied her, urged her to breathe, to hold on. The world narrowed to fragments, light, shadow, pressure, silence between the pain. By the time the child arrived, the sun had long disappeared. A small cry broke through the heavy air, weak but alive. "A boy," the midwife said softly, wrapping the child with careful hands. He was placed beside her, his movements slight, his breathing uneven but present. "Caelan Veilcrest," someone whispered. Isolde turned her head slowly, her eyes resting on the child without fully seeing him. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then touched him lightly, as if he were unsure he was real. There was no smile, no relief, only quiet. Life had entered the room, but something else had left it completely. The days that followed passed without shape. Black replaced color. Curtains remained drawn longer than they should. Meals were prepared but rarely finished. The manor continued to function but without its center. Isolde dressed in mourning and did not remove it. Weeks became months, months became years. She spoke often but rarely to those around her. Her voice was soft, distant, as if directed towards someone who stood just beyond sight. "You said you would return," she would murmur, standing near the window. Sometimes she would pause as if listening for an answer. There was never one. Caelan grew, slowly, carefully, watched over more by the household than by her mother. He was carried through the halls, fed, comforted, taught, but always at a slight distance from her. Not out of neglect, but because something within her had closed. Visitors came less often, conversations grew shorter, whispers began where silence could no longer hide concern. "She cannot accept it. She speaks as if he still lives. The estate cannot remain like this." The words spread quietly, but they spread. Through it all, Evander remained. He stepped into responsibilities without announcement. He reviewed accounts, spoke with tenants, made decisions that kept the estate from slipping further. He carried Caelan when needed, soothed him when he cried, ensured that nothing fell apart completely. He never forced Isolde to change. He simply stayed. Trust did not come suddenly. It formed slowly, through presence, through consistency, through the absence of pressure. Years passed, and the manor adjusted around her stillness. One evening, as the light faded and the rooms settled into their usual quiet, Isolde sat by the window with Caelan in her arms. He was no longer an infant, his small hands gripping lightly at her sleeve. She held him carefully, her gaze distant, fixed somewhere beyond the glass. "I am still here," she said softly, though it was unclear to whom. The child shifted slightly, leaning into her. She did not pull away, but she did not fully return either. The world moved forward. She remained where she had been left.
5 years had worn the edges of Valecrest Manor down in ways that could not be seen at a glance, but could be felt in every quiet corner. The gardens were still maintained, but not with the same care. The roses bloomed, though fewer than before. The long dining table remained polished, yet more often half-empty, meals prepared out of duty rather than enjoyment. Even the kitchens, once warm with laughter and steady rhythm, had grown quieter, the aroma of fresh bread replaced by simpler dishes stretched to last longer. Accounts no longer balanced as they once had, ledgers filled with careful corrections, numbers adjusted, payments delayed. The estate still stood, but it leaned, slowly, steadily, towards something uncertain. Visitors came more frequently now, though not out of affection. Nobles from nearby lands arrived with polite smiles and sharp observations, their conversations circling the same unspoken concern. A house without a duke cannot remain stable forever. Responsibility must be restored. Appearances matter more than grief. The words reached every corridor, every servant, every quiet space where silence used to be enough. Lady Seraphine no longer tolerated hesitation. "The house needs a duke again," she said one evening, her tone firm, leaving no space for argument. Not for pride, not for comfort, for survival. Isolde sat across from her, her hands folded neatly, her expression calm but distant. She did not argue. She did not agree. She simply listened, as though the decision being discussed belonged to someone else. Evander stood nearby, not intruding, not speaking unless spoken to. His presence had become constant over the years, as natural as the walls themselves. He handled matters that required attention, spoke when needed, remained silent when appropriate. Reliable, protective, always there. When a tenant arrived with concerns, Evander met him before the issue could grow. When supplies ran short, he ensured they were replaced. When Kaelin stumbled in the courtyard, it was Evander who lifted him, steadying him with quiet patience. He never demanded trust. He earned it. Isolde began to notice in small ways. A cup of tea placed beside her before she asked. A chair pulled slightly closer when she seemed unsteady. A conversation gently redirected when it became too heavy. There were moments when the weight of memory pressed too hard, when her breath shortened and her thoughts drifted back to a past that refused to stay buried. In those moments, Evander remained calm, his voice steady, never forcing her to return, only guiding her back when she was ready. "You cannot stay there forever," he said once, not unkindly. She did not answer immediately. "I am not there," she replied, softly. He held her gaze. "Then where are you?" She had no answer for that. The idea did not come all at once. It formed gradually, placed carefully into conversations, never as a demand, always as a possibility. The estate needs stability. Kaelin needs guidance. You deserve peace. Each word settled quietly, repeated not in force, but in presence. Isolde felt the shift within herself long before she acknowledged it. It was not a change of heart, nor a return of feeling. It was something quieter, a need to continue. But every step forward carried weight. Guilt followed closely behind. At night, she still spoke softly into the darkness, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not forget you." The answers remained unanswered. Morning always came, and with it the same reality. The decision did not arrive with clarity. It came with exhaustion. One afternoon, seated in the same room where she had once received the letter that changed everything, Isolde listened as Lady Seraphine spoke again, her tone measured but unwavering. "This is no longer about what was. It is about what must be." Evander said nothing. He did not need to. Isolde closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering what remained of her strength. When she opened them, the answer was already there. "I will do what is necessary," she said. There was no relief in her voice, no warmth, only acceptance. The marriage took place without celebration.
No grand gathering, no music filling the halls, no laughter carried through open doors. A quiet ceremony, witnessed by
Wilt thou
few,
have this woman to
completed
be
with
thy
words
wedded
that
wife?
felt more like
I will.
duty than
Wilt thou
promise.
have this man to be
The
thy
manor
wedded husband?
adjusted once more.
will.
I now
A
pronounce
duke
you
stood
husband and
within its
wife.
walls again, but something essential had not returned. That night, long after the house had settled into silence, Evander sat alone in his study. The candlelight flickered across his face, revealing nothing of his thoughts. In his hand was an old letter. The seal had been broken years ago, yet preserved carefully as though its value had never faded. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning lines he already knew by memory. There was no hesitation, no regret, only quiet recognition. When he finished reading, he folded it again with the same precision, placing it back into its envelope. For a moment, he remained still. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. And in that silence, the truth lingered, unseen but all but him. What had been lost on the battlefield was never an accident.
The years did not pass in the usual way for Roderick Vailcrest.
I won't break.
They did not move with seasons or celebrations or the gentle rhythm of life at home. They passed in darkness, in stone walls that held cold long after the sun had set, in narrow spaces where time had no shape except endurance. Captivity stripped everything down to its simplest form. Hunger came regularly, never enough to kill, always enough to weaken. Meals were plain, thin broth, coarse bread that hardened too quickly, water that carried the taste of iron. Sleep was broken, never deep, interrupted by noise, by movement, by the constant awareness that nothing was certain. At first, he resisted with anger, then with strength, then with silence. What remained, after the body had adjusted and the mind had no choice but to endure, was memory. He held on to it carefully. Isolde, standing in the morning light, the way her hand rested over his, the quiet promise he had made without hesitation, and the child he had never seen. He repeated those images in his mind until they became stronger than the walls around him. They were not comfort, they were purpose. Years passed, not counted by calendars, but by the gradual change in those around him. Faces disappeared, new ones took their place. Some men stopped speaking, others forgot how to hope. Roderick did not allow himself that loss. Even when his body weakened, when his reflection became unfamiliar, when his voice grew quieter from lack of use, he held on to one belief: he would return. Not because it was likely, but because he refused to accept anything else. When the change finally came, it arrived without warning. The guards moved differently, orders were given with less force. Doors that had remained closed for years opened without explanation. Word spread slowly, carried in uncertain whispers before it became something solid enough to believe. A new king had taken the throne. And with that change came decisions meant to erase old injustices. Prisoners, those long forgotten, were to be released. When they came for him, Roderick did not react immediately. He stood still, watching, waiting for the moment to shift, for it to reveal itself as something temporary. It did not. Chains were removed. The door remained open. "You are free to go," one of the men said, his voice flat, as if the words carried no weight. But they did. Roderick stepped forward slowly, each movement measured, as though his body needed to remember how to move without restraint. The air outside felt different, not because it had changed, but because he had. The journey back was not immediate. Strength did not return all at once. He rested when needed, accepted what little food he could, rebuilt himself piece by piece. Each step forward carried expectation. Each mile closed the distance between what had been lost and what he still believed remained. He imagined the manor as he had left it, unchanged, waiting. Isolde standing where he had last seen her. The child, his child, now old enough to walk, to speak, to recognize him.
Hope did not feel dangerous, it felt necessary. When Veilcrest finally came into view, it stood as it had always had, strong against the horizon, its structure unchanged. But as he drew closer, something felt different. The grounds were fuller, the gardens more refined. Movement within the estate carried a different rhythm, more structured, more controlled. It was not decay he saw, it was restoration. Roderick slowed as he approached the entrance, his steps heavier now, not from weakness, but from something harder to name. The door stood before him, solid, familiar. He raised his hand and knocked. The sound echoed lightly through the wood, followed by a brief pause before movement came from within. The door opened. A boy stood there.
Father,
Not a
this is my
child,
door.
not yet a man, somewhere in between. Roderick's breath caught without warning. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same shape of the face, a reflection of himself standing just a few feet away. For a moment, nothing else existed. My son, the thought formed, though no words left his lips. The boy looked at him with polite curiosity, unaware of what stood before him. Then he turned his head slightly, calling into the house without hesitation. "Father?" The word landed with quiet certainty. Footsteps followed, measured, familiar in a way that did not belong. And then Evander stepped into view, composed, unchanged in ways that mattered, standing exactly where Roderick should have been. The space between them held everything that had been lost, replaced, rewritten without consent. Roderick did not move. He did not speak. The years he had survived, the hope he had carried, the image he had protected within his mind, all of it collided with a single truth. He had returned, but nothing had waited for him. And in that moment, standing at the threshold of his own home, Roderick Veilcrest remained completely still, as the life he had fought to reclaim stood before him, already belonging to someone else.
Evander stepped forward first, his composure steady, his expression controlled in a way that revealed nothing. The boy moved slightly aside, unaware of the weight gathering in the space around him. Roderick's eyes did not leave the doorway, as if something inside him refused to accept what he had already seen. Then she appeared. Isolde. For a moment, time lost its direction. She stood just behind the threshold, one hand resting lightly against the frame as though she needed its support. The years had softened her features, but not erased what he remembered. There was a quiet fragility to her now, something worn beneath the surface. And then his gaze lowered. Her hand shifted slightly. The curve beneath her dress was unmistakable. Pregnant. The realization did not arrive with anger. It arrived with stillness, a silence so complete it pushed everything else aside. Their eyes met, and neither of them spoke. There were no questions, no accusations, no attempt to explain what could not be explained in a single moment. 15 years collapsed between them, and yet nothing connected them anymore. Roderick stepped back, not abruptly, not in panic, just enough to break whatever fragile thread still held him in place. He turned. No words, no farewell. The gravel beneath his boots sounded louder than it should have as he walked away from the house that had once been his. No one followed. The air outside felt colder than before, though the sky remained unchanged. He did not stop until the manor disappeared behind him, until the path opened into something wider, quieter. The river lay ahead, its surface moving steadily, untouched by anything that had just unfolded. He stood at its edge, staring into the water without seeing his reflection. For the first time since his return, his control broke. Not outwardly, not in movement, but inside, where thought no longer followed order. One idea rose above the rest, clear, sharp, immediate. Evander. The name settled into his mind with a weight that demanded action.
His hands tightened at his sides, the tension building without direction. It would be simple, direct, final. The thought did not frighten him. It felt justified. But just as quickly, something else followed. Not hesitation, understanding. Killing him would end nothing. It would answer nothing. It would leave the truth buried beneath anger, replacing one loss with another. Roderick exhaled slowly, forcing the thought down, not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. This was not only about what had been taken, it was about how and why. When he returned to the manor, the atmosphere had shifted. The quiet remained, but it was no longer calm. It carried awareness now, a tension that moved through the halls without sound. Isolde waited, not in the drawing room, not before others, but in a smaller chamber where the light was dim and the space felt closed, as if holding what needed to be said. She did not step forward when he entered, neither did he. For a moment, they simply stood across from each other, the distance between them filled with everything neither of them knew how to name. Roderick spoke first. Why? The word was simple. It carried no accusation, only weight. Isolde's breath caught slightly, her hand instinctively resting against her stomach before falling back to her side. "They told me you were dead," she said, her voice steady but strained. "Not missing, not lost, dead." He did not interrupt. "I waited," she continued, "for years. I refused to accept it. I spoke to you as if you could still hear me. I stayed where you left me until there was nothing left of me to hold on to." Her eyes met his, not with defense, but with something closer to exhaustion. "I buried you," she said quietly, "because I was told there was nothing left to wait for." The words did not ease the weight in his chest, but they changed its shape. Roderick looked at her differently now, not as someone who had chosen to replace him, but as someone who had been forced to live without him. "You mourned me," he said. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Silence followed again, but it no longer felt the same. Something had shifted. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but understanding. Still, something did not sit right. Small details surfaced in his mind, fragments that refused to align. "The letter," he said slowly. "Who brought it?" Isolde frowned slightly, searching her memory. "A royal courier. It was sealed." "Who confirmed it?" "The council. Your mother." The words trailed off as the thought formed. Roderick's gaze hardened, not toward her, but beyond her. Too many things had been accepted without question, too many conclusions reached too quickly. "Something is wrong," he said. The realization settled between them, quiet but undeniable. Later, in the main hall, Lady Seraphine stood waiting. She had already heard enough. "You must let this rest," she said, her tone firm, though not without strain. "What has been done cannot be undone." Roderick faced her, his posture straight, his expression no longer uncertain. "Rest?" he repeated. "For the sake of this family, for what remains." She held his gaze unmoving. "For 15 years, he said, his voice low, controlled, "I lived with nothing but questions." She did not respond. "I came back to find answers," he continued, "and I will have them." A pause followed, heavy but clear. "No," he said finally, "this ends with the truth." There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. And as he turned away, the path ahead no longer felt uncertain. It felt defined, because whatever had been hidden would not remain hidden for long.
The truth did not come all at once. It revealed itself slowly, in whispers, in broken memories, in details that no longer aligned the way they should. A letter that arrived too quickly, a battle that failed too precisely, a brother who stepped into power too easily. Roderick Veilcrest had survived war, captivity, and 15 years of silence. But what he had just uncovered was far more dangerous than any battlefield. Because betrayal like this does not end quietly. And now he is no longer the man who left for war. He is the man who came back for the truth. And when that truth is finally exposed, someone will lose everything. Part 2 will reveal the proof, the confrontation.